Hello and welcome to the show. I am super excited to have tonight's guest, Alan Pearce. He kind of fell into this whole situation. His book is called Coma and Near Death Experience. Beautiful, the beautiful, disturbing, and dangerous world of the unconsciousness. It's fascinating, absolutely fascinating how these people seem to go into an almost like an alternate life. A lot of these have to do with induced comas, things like that, and that all had to do with. I'm going to let him explain it because it's a great story how he got into this. No one else has done any of this research, and he is a former BBC correspondent. He's an author of several books, and that link is will be below in the show notes. And he's also a journalist, and it's 1 o'clock in the morning for you there, Alan. Welcome. Thank you for doing this show live.
Martin, thank you so much. Has to be live. Has to be live.
Yeah, it's so much better that way. That's right. That's right. So I got to ask you first of all, what? How did you figure out this was happening? You know, to enough to, but it was through. Is it through Facebook, like support pages? Is that how it all started?
Yeah, that was down the line. I mean, the notion of this came during the early days of COVID, when my wife and I are sitting at home with not a lot to do, and I'm watching far too much rolling news. But I'm wondering why so many people with COVID are being placed into comas. Like, great thing, how does it work? It's like a nice deep sleep, as they tell you it is. And I thought I'd look into it. And okay, it goes like this. They say that coma is an essential tool in critical care. It has been for the past 50 years. It enables a deeper, more restorative form of sleep, giving nature and the meds the best possible chance. The event itself should be an utter blank in the person's life. None of this is true, but that's what they tell you. I only started to find these things out when I want to take it a little bit further. So I found some coma survivors on the Coma Survivors Facebook group. And they started to tell me things that I just didn't know what to make of them initially. Within coma, and you can't dream, by the way, within a coma or have a nightmare because your brain is effectively offline. And yet, it goes to demonstrate that the brain and the mind are definitely not the same thing. Because when the brain is switched off in a medically induced coma, in many instances, the mind appears to go off on journeys of its own. And this can include alternate lives, spanning decades with every single detail that you can imagine. Holding down jobs, getting married, having kids, going on vacation, that sort of detail. Other people would list multiple deaths that they went through, one after another, almost all violent, sometimes with themes such as drowning. Other people would find themselves in extraordinarily strange realities, which are more hellish, you might say. One person in the book told me she spent 80 years in a serial killer themed bar as a living mannequin, and they carried out murders and whatnot on her every night for 80 years. And she could measure the time she gave birth 3 times through rape, and she had all sorts of details she could talk about that. The events that people have within coma are never two are the same. Two are never the same. Sometimes they're in the same ballpark, but they defy all imagination. They are so strange. I don't think any Hollywood scriptwriter could ever come up with this unless he or she had been in a coma.
Right. Now, you don't think it has to do with the drugs?
Mm-mm.
And
No.
so why don't you explain how?
Let me just make that clear. There are no drugs or cocktail of drugs that will give you an alternate life spanning decades while just days or weeks pass in this world. If there were, we'd all know about it. It's like a plot from a Philip K. Dick short story. That doesn't happen. When they give you the meds for a prolonged deep sedation, i.e. coma, more or less, depending on availability, it's the same drugs they will give you on the operating table for 2 to 4 hours or what have you. In the case of coma patients, it can be 2 to 3 weeks, months, even 3 months in some extreme cases, that they're fed all these drugs. If you were to connect their brain to an EEG brain scanner, you would find that it is flatlining, as one doctor described it to me, like a heart without a pulse. There is no way they can dream. They cannot go through their circadian rhythms, so they don't get REM sleep. None of that happens. And incidentally, their organs are not doing their 24-hour cycle and invariably switch off. So what is happening to people, you cannot explain by the drugs. All the drugs do is switch off initially a key part of the brain called the default mode network. It's only discovered about a dozen years ago. And it's like the captain of our ship. It processes our conscious reality. When you switch off the default mode network, it leads to an expansion of consciousness. They've looked at people in the deeper states of meditation. They find that the default mode network switches off, and that expands their consciousness. The same happens when you take certain psychedelics. Rather than the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree, as you might expect, it goes remarkably quiet. And this is the default mode network switching off. When that's switched off, your mind would appear free to roam.
So when you're saying, I always think of like when you use the word flatlining, like it would be like if someone was basically brain dead, but it's a different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't like to use the term brain dead because it implies other things. But to all intents and purposes, they are. It's called a burst suppression on an EEG. It is a line going completely flat. There is nothing happening. There is nothing going on in there. The odd thing is that unless you're in a coma because you've got some kind of brain injury, they do not generally monitor your brain, certainly not in the case of COVID. So they don't know how deep they are sending people. Different drugs have different effects on different people. Some people bubble just below the surface and they're aware of everything around them, people talking in the room, but they can't blink or move any muscle or scream even. Others go so very deep that they are effectively dead. I spoke to people for the book who were in the book who had died in a clinical sense and had to be resuscitated, and told me what they saw when they died. And whilst I said earlier that no two stories are the same, oftentimes they're in a very, very similar reality. We have the thing called the near-death experience, the NDE. It can happen to people who are facing imminent death, and it can happen to people possibly as they are passing over. Why it's happening, well, we can get into that. People are experiencing that very, very, very much within coma. Oftentimes they're in a beautiful landscape, depending on where they come from. If one young lady helped us with the books from the Italian Alps, and she found herself in an alpine meadow. I imagine if I interviewed an Inuit from the far north, he would live in some ice-capped landscape. That would be his idea of paradise. And oftentimes when they're there, they will meet dead relatives, communicate with them telepathically, invariably. And a whole range of other things may or may not happen, but mostly these are really, really beautiful experiences. These crop up a lot within coma survivors. But there's a flip side, which is if that's heaven, there's hell. And I talked of the example of the woman, Deborah, who was in this appalling serial killer themed bar. Other people find themselves in organ harvesting facilities, and that they're brought to life, harvested, killed, brought back to life, grow new organs, harvested, and on and on and on and on. One guy who helped me with the book, James, his stories are astonishingly awful. He had to watch his wife dying in childbirth. He's not married in this world. Over and over again, like it was on a loop. And he's in the room with all the fear and the horror and the screaming over and over again. This is really common, not that particular story, but events akin to that. Oftentimes, when they try to bring people out of a coma, they might come out biting and fighting and ripping the tubes out of them. I mentioned the Italian lady earlier. She told me that when she was coming out of her coma and reducing the meds, She was desperate to hang on to anything of this world, and she ripped all the tubes out, blood going everywhere. The first thing that happens from the nurse's perspective is, oh dear, we have to turn the meds back up again. So you oftentimes send them straight back into this appalling world. So James might be sent straight back to watch his wife dying in childbirth over and over again. But the hospital staff don't know these things because they never, this is the way the hospital systems are. Intensive care rarely ever have any follow-up of their patients. By the time they leave, particularly if they've been on a ventilator, they can't speak for often weeks at a time because of damage to vocal cords. So they've got no one tells them what they've experienced. The doctors and nurses are doing everything they do through the goodness of their heart, through pure kindness. And yet they're doing the worst thing to the patient. They're putting them into a coma. And this is the other thing. It turns out that it's massively overused. There's only a handful of instances where you might employ it. And really, there's no medical textbook that advocates prolonged deep sedation beyond a few hours. And yet people are put in these situations for months at a time. And their brains are off and they go off to other existences. In 2 weeks, one guy experienced 40 years in the 1960s and 70s living in the American Midwest. He even got called up to fight in an alternate Southeast Asian war. He says it wasn't Vietnam, but it was like Vietnam. It rained the whole time. So he's on patrol or in trenches. And the thing he wanted to talk about most was how his fingers were always so wrinkly and his toes, and they never ever seemed to get better. That level of detail. And 2 weeks had passed while he's in a coma. And he had all of this. And he had a partner. They just had a baby girl when he was taken from that life and put back into this one. And when you wake up, in this world, he had his fiance holding his hand, saying, "Oh God, you're back, hooray!" And he's thinking, "Who the heck are you? You know, I've just left my partner and my baby behind. I think you're in the wrong room." But he can't say it because of damages to vocal cords. Other people can come out of coma and not know what humans are.
Not know what humans are?
No,
Oh, wow.
no.
Now, let me just ask you this. With the work you're doing, have you spoken to any medical professionals about this? You know,
Yeah.
because to me, it sounds like it's not a very good idea putting people in
No.
chemically induced comas.
No, we've spoken to a vast number of medicos who've helped us with the book. For example, Dr. Wes Ely, professor of medicine at Vanderbilt, arguably one of the finest medical schools on the planet, helped extensively with the book and wrote the foreword. And we've had various other people helping us with the book. It goes like this. Most doctors and nurses are practicing experience-based medicine as opposed to evidence-based medicine. They don't see a problem, therefore they don't change what they're doing. As I just said, they don't actually get to follow their patients, so they don't see the problem. Because of the way life is, they don't all get to read the latest medical literature, which all decries prolonged deep sedation because it leads to terrible, terrible damage. Mentally, people can have tens of points wiped off their IQs. Physically, joints can calcify, nerves can disconnect, your muscles cease to function. You might look okay because you're pumped full of fluids, oftentimes up to 50 pounds excess weight in fluid, so you can't see the muscle wastage. You stand up, there's nothing supporting you. You haven't got your diaphragm muscles, so you need help breathing for months afterwards. You can't swallow because all your muscles in your throat are atrophied, and so on and so forth. All of this is known. This is called post-intensive care syndrome. There are a number, but a minor number, of doctors and nurses who are fully aware of this, who are desperately trying to tell their colleagues, you've got to stop what you're doing, read the latest meds. But they themselves are finding themselves getting into trouble with people trying to get their licenses taken away because they're not doing the kind thing and knocking the patient out.
Wow. And and why I just wanted to post this right here. We can just take a quick look at it. This person here said they had a stroke 2 weeks ago, and my deceased father came to me that night and asked me if I wanted to stay or go. chose to
Yeah.
stay.
I would put that down as a near-death experience.
Yeah.
Many a time, a number of people in the book have told me that they got to Heaven's Gate, or however you wish to describe it, and were given the option. Sometimes they were told outright, no, this is not your time. You have to go back. Others are given the option. Yeah, that's again, it's in the ballpark. These things for sure are happening. You can't talk to a doctor. It's a bit like, alien abductions. Who's really going to believe you? And you come out of something like this. You've had like for 20 years living in the American Midwest or whatever. How do you explain that to anyone? People will
Mm,
tell you, doctors will tell you that's a false memory, or you hallucinated. You can't hallucinate, incidentally, in a coma, because hallucination is a conscious state, invariably with the eyes open. So that's not even a reasonable answer. It makes no sense to say these things, but doctors who cannot explain our current level of consciousness
right.
haven't got a chance to explain the other levels of consciousness, such as those on psychedelics, such as those experienced by people in transcendental meditation. And they certainly can't explain what's happening to people in the depths of coma. Not a chance.
So it's not even in, the word unconscious. I mean, it's when you're
What
at
is
that.
unconscious? I mean, what
Yeah,
does that mean? Because we've all
exactly. Yeah.
agreed on a word, consciousness, to
Yeah.
explain something we don't understand. So it's very hard to say, therefore, what is unconscious, because I don't think everyone that I interviewed who've been in a coma, in a clinical sense, were unconscious. Within their coma, many a time they say, I woke up and found myself in this particular reality. So they're having all these different levels. They are, in some cases, just completely in the dark, just a brain or mind completely in the dark, floating around, no sensations of anything. And this can go on for ages, like an eternity. Then they might wake up and find themselves in a particular reality. Whoa,
It's incredible.
it's strange,
So
isn't it? It's the strangest
yeah,
thing I've ever explored.
so it's almost like the mind and consciousness are. I don't even know what I'm saying. It seems like there's
Well, the
more
brain
than
and the mind are
one
not the
thing.
same thing. The
Yeah.
brain, if it's switched off, and you can see it's switched off by looking at it, and yet those people will come back and tell you an incredible detailed story that cannot be explained by false memory. But that's what they're told. And they all think they've gone mad, because unlike, say, some people have had a near-death experience, you can research it, find it online. Coma survivors generally keep all this to themselves because they're told you've had a false memory. Therefore, it was so intense, I have gone mad, and I will keep it to myself.
Sure.
Many of the coma survivors helping us with the book, didn't come straight out and say, tell us your coma story. It took, in some cases, months of just talking about, the world of coma and stuff, that people began to tell me their stories. And they were telling me things that they had not told their dearest, their nearest and dearest. They've been too embarrassed to do so. They're doing so in this instance because they want to show other coma survivors, didn't go mad. It happened to me just like this. And also, doctors, nurses, wake up, for heaven's sake, because with the best will in the world, like, you're putting people through the most unbelievable torment, and the mortality rates in coma, incidentally, are shockingly high, and that's all proven in the medical statistics.
Mm,
Shockingly high.
really?
It
Wow.
has to be
Yeah.
avoided.
Right. So when people have these type of situations and they read your book, now here's your book here. They read
Thank
your
you.
book, and I hear this happen all the time when I talk to people like you that have written a book. It comes out, it kind of makes a splash, like I believe this is, and all of a sudden you get contacted by all these people that saying, "Hey, this happened to me." Is this happening to you now?
Yeah.
Are you getting people
And
reaching out?
it is. I mean, not actually floodgates as such, but we are getting people saying, this happened to me. I did a few phone-ins elsewhere, and 7 people called in, and 7 people had been in that situation.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
proportionally, because also this is the other thing with COVID, because so many people globally were placed into medically induced comas. It was the thing to do once they got to a certain point of unwellness. Boom, shove them into a coma. Sheer scale is now apparent of the damage amongst the survivors. Also, some of the survivors are vocal. You've got people like graphic artists or musicians or whatever who have tried to capture their coma experience and convey it in the form of art. So that's starting to happen. But otherwise, I mean, it's just no one's really aware of it. No one's aware of it. No one is aware of it. What we want to do next is try and get a TV series going, a six-parter kind of thing, and to have people come forward and tell their stories. And it's the hardest thing, though, to tell a story, because it's like, just tell me the story of your life, say. Where do I start? Where do I stop? What do I pay attention to? So they just rattle through things. When they do start telling, I did this and I did that and I was over there. Oh, and I had this other life when I was doing that. And it's just unbelievable what they will say. And they think when they're telling me that they're the only people that's had this experience. And I'm telling them, I spoke to somebody 3 days ago who had a very similar experience to you. And they're going, what? It's blowing their minds as much as it's blowing my minds. It's giving them peace of mind and that they did not go mad. But everyone who survives a coma is not the same person. Many a time people will say, I wish to God I'd never come back. When they come, the world that they were in seemed far more realistic than this world. And when they come back to this world, it's kind of glitchy, a bit like in the plot of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where people are just not quite right. And they can't decide, can't be certain whether this is now a coma and their life before was their life before the coma. They can't decide, some of them, whether they've died and not come back. Other people are aware they're in this life but don't want to go to sleep because they're going to go back to some other life again. In many cases, the terrible lives. So they just won't sleep at night. They only doze on the couch during the day when somebody's around because it's the only time they feel safe. So people are left horrified and shocked by these experiences. And no one, as I say, can explain it to them. No one.
Wow. Now, are there people that are mourning their life that they had in a coma?
Oh, yeah. And the
Like
children.
they had a better life in a coma than they do
All
in
right,
reality?
let's talk about mourning. Let's talk about mourning a life. Nikki, lovely young mum from Scotland, contracts pneumonia, turns to sepsis real quick. The doctors say to her husband, she's unlikely to survive the night. Oh, and did you know your wife is pregnant? I said, no, I had no idea. We didn't have any idea that she was pregnant. And I said, well, look, we're just going to have to terminate because of the risks involved. They put Nikki into a coma. She wakes up within her coma and finds herself in a railway carriage in India. It's a single compartment. Everything in that carriage is kitted out for the birth of a newborn baby. Bearing in mind, she'd had no notion she's pregnant. Within her coma, she's the heat, the smell, she describes the room, absolute detail, the rocking of the train, everything, total detail. She's pregnant. She's in labor. She gives birth. She's holding her baby boy, and she looks into his eyes. She said his eyes were a blue I've never seen before. They just burned into your soul. Well, I'm going to fast forward a bit. And Nikki comes out of her coma, and she can't speak because of damage to vocal cords. And as she starts to slowly gain her faculties, she wants her baby, which incidentally was named, called Mason. She wants her baby. So she's sitting up in bed, rocking her arms in front of her husband, mimicking cradling a baby. And he's freaking out, knowing that she's had a termination and she shouldn't even know anything about it. Fast forward again a bit. Eventually, she's out of hospital. The doctors say you will never be able to carry a child again.
Oh.
But she does. She gives birth in this world, this life, in Scotland. The baby is born in a hospital. The midwife picks up the baby. What do you think the first thing the midwife said was?
The eyes.
Oh, oh my God, I've never seen blue like that before. They burn into your soul. Now,
Ah,
explain that one. Now, Nikki, to all intents and purposes, and I believe it's as real as anything, Nikki lost a child that she bore and cared for, and all the rest of it. Now she goes to see various psychologists or whatever, and they're saying, "You've had a false memory. It was a dream. Get over it. You've not lost a baby." Well, she has. She has. And when her baby was born with blue eyes, I spoke to somebody who's very into the spiritual world. And she said, "Well, yeah, obviously that's the soul, isn't it? The soul was, stopped from and being in that first child, Mason, and came up in the second child and made itself clear with the eyes, like it was obvious to her, which, like, well, maybe it is obvious to some. So that's one example. And Nikki, to this day, grieves over a lost baby. Other people,
wow.
one guy who wanted to share his stories of the book, every time he tried to tell me, he would just break down in tears.
Ah,
He'd been married, he'd had 3 daughters, and he had a really nice life. I think he was an architect an architect. And he just died within that life somehow and woke up in hospital. And like, he doesn't feel any affection for his wife. He may well have done before, but in this life now, he feels nothing for her. He doesn't know her.
wow.
He feels that she doesn't know him. And people are stuck like this, and they are grieving, a wife and 3 girls, and you're not going to see them again. But you can't talk to anyone about it because they think you're nuts.
Wow. And so are there many cases where the people have like, I mean, can they picture what they look like? And
Okay, one guy said, 20 years under, I don't know what I look like. I never looked in a mirror. I never saw my reflection, which is like, whoa, spooky. Another guy told me that he had multiple lives around about the 18th and 19th centuries. And he said he looked really good in a Georgian wig. So he could see himself. So I guess it's different for everyone. Yeah.
no, but I mean, do people remember their children and their wife and how they looked? Has anyone tried to recreate how their spouse
Well, yeah,
looked
like a
like or anything
photo
that you
fit or
know of?
something. No, I don't think people dare even go down that path. Mostly because they think they're mad. Mostly, they all think they're
Mm,
mad. And
mm.
it's only by talking to a group of them and telling them you're not alone, and hopefully people picking the book up or hearing the audio book and realizing, no, you're not nuts. And they all use words like crazy, bonkers, mad, loony, all of these things to describe what they've been through. And the relief, the palpable relief, when you can tell them other people's stories and they go, well, whoa, yeah, that's a bit like mine, but blah, blah, blah happened. They are going to real places. I'm now convinced that there are multiple dimensions, and I think quantum science is demonstrating that we're close to proving such a thing. So I'm thinking that people like Nikki and James and whoever that I've mentioned in the book, they've been to alternate realities which are possibly other dimensions. Many times, some people have gone back in time in their own lives, inside their bodies. And for example, there's a hospital chaplain in Birmingham, Alabama, called Corey Agricola. And he went back in time and he's having dinner with his parents, having fried chicken or something. You can taste it, you can smell everything. He's completely there 100% in the moment. And he had a sequence of events where he just went back in time and relived those moments. It may not be a coincidence that when people like close to death, they say, my life flashed before my eyes,
Mm,
because that was what was happening to Corey. But it wasn't flashing. He was there taking his time, having dinner, having dessert, maybe having coffee. There was no flashing involved in any of this. He was there 100%.
wow. Yeah, these cases are just so fascinating. And would you say that disproportionately people in COVID induced, in the induced comas during COVID, would you say that there was disproportionate as far as the people coming back with all these stories?
Hard to gauge. I think I've got a good mix of like pre-COVID and COVID people.
Hmm.
According to various research that's been undertaken, people who were placed into medically induced comas with COVID were given more meds for longer than people were prior to COVID. COVID was a real scare. I mean, I don't know what, people have all sorts of notions about COVID. I spoke to a lot of doctors and nurses. It scared the bejesus out of them. And people would decondition and they would just go. And they didn't know what to do with them. And it's a bit like, oh, we don't know what to do. Let's put them in the freezer and see what happens. And maybe they'll survive, maybe they won't survive. I mean, that actually is not much of an exaggeration because that's pretty much how it worked. And a lot of people died. Statistically, this is proven. A lot of people died in COVID inside a medically induced coma who might not have died if they'd been kept conscious and active, because half of the problem of being in a coma is that you are immobile.
Hmm.
Now, it was thought for thousands of years, in fact, that bed rest is the best thing when you're not well. Everyone's done it. Well,
Hmm.
it turns out that just 1 week of solid bed rest, not getting up or anything, 1 week can result in the loss of 40% of lean muscle. That's just 1 week.
Wow.
Yeah.
Really?
Now, oh yeah, shocking. And when you're in a coma, you're not going through circadian rhythms. Your kidneys, for example, are not going through their 24-hour cycle. They're pumping you full of meds and they're not being processed in the conventional manner. And many a time they're inside your body, they're under that skin, in that fluid mix that is making you look all puffy. And oftentimes, some people come out, as I said earlier, biting and fighting. Others, they switch them off and they don't come out. They don't come out for a heck of a long time. And the family are just petrified. He was switched off, 4 weeks ago, and he's still not here. Occasionally he blinks or something, and that's it. And then maybe they come out of it, or maybe they stay almost in a vegetative state. I'll give you an example of how the damage that this can cause. One doctor, Dr. Wes Ely, one of his patients was a mathematical whiz with an stunning IQ of 140
Hmm.
prior to being placed in a coma in the hospital that he was working in. He got into his head that he should follow up all his patients, was horrified when he met her. She couldn't add up her checking account. He had an IQ test taken on her. Her IQ had gone from 140 to 100. Such a drop in someone with average intelligence would render them mentally subnormal. He looked at her brain on an fMRI scanner and saw that various parts of her brain had shriveled. She was, I think, 38, and yet she had the brain of a very old woman with dementia. And that was because of the inactivity of her brain, that everything was just switched off and it was so pumped full of clouding meds that the brain just was not ever going to come back. And now she doesn't work with numbers anymore. She works with horses. And these stories, there's so many of them.
There's no chance of regeneration of anything like that either, I would think.
It's like dementia. And there's another thing. When people have got dementia, oftentimes it looks like they're having a conversation with somebody. Maybe they are. Sometimes if you talk to people with Alzheimer's about their life, they will give you a completely wrong account of their life, like a completely different life. Or maybe they're recounting another past life. You just don't know. We have no notion where people are going, where their minds are going, when their brains have been switched off. Sometimes it's kind of like you can see what's happening in that you have an out-of-body experience in the hospital and you're looking down on your body. You can feel that your mind has taken leave of your body. Other times you're just in another reality, or you wake up in another reality. Or as I said before, you're just in the dark, just a mind in the dark, floating in some kind of black soup, and nothing happening. The Italian girl that I mentioned earlier, She had just had her 15th birthday when she was knocked off a motor scooter and was eventually placed in a medically induced coma. She spent forever in the dark, and she kept calling out in her mind, "Mummy, mummy, please come and wake me up. I've been sleeping too long. Will someone please come and wake me up?" I mean, what a horrible thing. And she's only a child. What a horrible thing to do to anyone. What could happen, let's put aside from the fact that you shouldn't actually be placing people into medically induced comas anyway, outside of a handful of instances and only briefly. If you were to do that, you might say to them beforehand, and oftentimes they don't even say, "We're going to knock you unconscious now, pal." What they could do is say, "You may experience some very strange events within your coma, but don't worry about it. When you come out of it, we've got somebody who's been there too who can discuss it all with you." That would be great. No one discusses any of it with anyone, ever, ever. Or if you find yourself in some, see, people will criticize that because there are post-coma like support groups, but they sit around in chairs saying false memory, hallucination, ICU delirium. They don't talk of alternate lives, past lives, other realities. Right? They just don't. So they get no satisfaction. And they're sitting in a room with people in chairs around them thinking, "I'm completely mad. I
Right.
can't tell them that I was a fighter pilot in the First World War," you know, because it's like no one's going to take it seriously. So there's no help. There's absolutely no help for anyone, which is why the book and the audio book, I'm hoping, will give people some satisfaction, some understanding, name for your pain, as it were, because they are not the same people, and they needed so much support, and it's not there. And the other thing is, generally speaking, once you get your weight back and so on, but you still can't walk or balance properly, but you look okay and you appear to be okay. Inside, many a time, people are just panicking because they're not sure they can make it up the stairs because of, balance issues. They're thinking, "Who is this person in the room? Oh, I keep asking that. I must have asked that 100 times today," and so on. And they're just stuck in these worlds, absolutely stuck. And people won't take it seriously. And the number of relationships and marriages that break down amongst coma survivors because they get over it. Like, you had the best treatment possible. The doctors and nurses at the hospital were wonderful. Get over it. But you can't. You just can't get over it because no one's given you a satisfactory explanation.
I was going to ask you, and you sort of just answered it right there. But basically, have people rejected the lives they've come back to? But it sounds like they have. Some of them have.
Yeah, I mean, there's only a certain number of people I could actually find to talk to. It's around about 120 plus in depth helping us with the book. Yeah, more than one has said, "I wish I had not come back." In one case, somebody also called Debbie, she experienced something that was so fantastically beautiful. She found herself on a bed, which somehow became a stage. She was levitating above it while she was surrounded by entities holding hands. She said they weren't human, they weren't alien, they were the embodiment of love. And they just pumped love into her and her healing for healing. And she said they healed all my life wounds. But she had to fight, and they were encouraging her to fight telepathically. She never felt so happy or at peace in all her life. She comes out of a coma. She's got uncaring family. No one wants to talk about what she's been through. Everyone seems glitchy and weird. And she just wishes she could go back to that existence. And she will pine that for the rest of her days. Others, they see their dead relatives perhaps, and maybe they're told to return home, and they just don't want to. They've never felt so wonderful. And this is like over and over again, people telling me this. I never felt so at ease, so at peace, so at one with the universe. I am the universe. I am God. I am everything. A couple of people said that in as many words to me. So when you come back to this world, and it's not even as clear visually as the one you've just left, they just can't settle to it. And, you know, in many cases, people said, okay, you know, I'll take my time, but, you know, I'll go, but I'll be really glad to get out of this one.
Right. Now, when you've done all this research, talked to all these people, how has it changed you? How do you feel about, for instance, death?
Yeah, big change. Okay, I'm a journalist. I used to do a lot of foreign affairs, which meant wars and disasters. I saw a lot of people die or terrible events. And I thought dead meant dead. And the research I was doing in this book enabled me to talk to people, as I said earlier, who died, clinically died, and came back and could tell me stories. And when you realize it's like talking as a journalist to eyewitnesses to an event, eyewitnesses who've not had chance to collaborate amongst themselves, and they're all talking of remarkably similar yet different things. I didn't realize it, but my outlook had changed. Halfway through writing the book, my daughter, Rebecca, died. She was a police detective, completely out of the blue. Patently, it's upsetting. It's the worst thing that can happen to a parent. And I had all of that.
Oh,
I had simultaneously this odd solace, which came from knowing that you don't die. Because I realized at that point, like the penny dropped, that you can't die. The first law of thermodynamics has it that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. And my daughter Rebecca was a ball of energy. So where did that go? It had to go somewhere. So I'm convinced we never die. And I think when people have the near-death experience, I think this is common probably to everyone who passes over, and maybe to all mammals, that something wonderful happens at the point of perceived death, as in I'm falling off a cliff, I'm going to die, or they're coming at me with guns or whatever, or that you actually are physically going because you're having a heart attack or whatever. Nature, God, call it what you will, has given us something truly remarkable that either eases the passing or opens a gateway to what lies beyond. Now, the research in this book led me to look for parallels. And okay, within the human body, we produce a psychedelic substance called NN-DMT. And this is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. When people take ayahuasca, they go to other realities. And if two people who are like partners, say, take it together, they can both go to the same reality together.
hmm.
Now, the similarities between DMT in that situation, ayahuasca, the similarities between DMT in scientific trials, and a great book to read is Rick Strassman's DMT, the Spirit Molecule. People go to distinct realities, many of which resemble alien abductions, so it's certainly well worth a read. And we know that the human body produces DMT. We speculate that it's the pineal gland here in between the eyes going back a bit, but it's unproven because you can't prod and poke ethically a healthy individual's pineal gland. So they can do it with rats, for example. So they induce a heart attack in a rat, and they find the DMT in its system has spiked about 600%.
Hmm.
If they check, which they don't very often, the urine of people suffering from schizophrenia, you will find DMT in their urine, which could account for some of the events that schizophrenics experience. It's within all of us, this, and together with other chemicals that we've yet to pinpoint and analyze and name even. And they must be producing a remarkable amount of cocktail of drugs that will, in this instance, open you up to a different reality. And I think people in coma are experiencing that. And for many, they're going way beyond that because the meds, if you're in intensive care, you're close to death. If they put you in a coma, you're very close to death. And the meds push you that much further. And they go beyond that. Go way beyond what people are experiencing with ayahuasca and with DMT trials. And they are living minute by minute alternate lives or going back in the past or trapped in hell. So within that, there are mechanisms within the human body that maybe just allow us to see other realities, as simple as that.
Wow. Uh, very sorry about your daughter. I saw you did
It's okay.
dedicate
It feels like part of the
the
story.
book.
It feels like part of the story, and an incredible solace that the book has given me to make me think this way. I loved her dearly, and but I don't think she's dead. Yeah, but
Mm,
I'll catch up sooner or later. It's like that. And
yeah.
the more I look into this world, the more likely that just seems to me. Mentioned that to me like prior to doing this book, and I would have said I was nuts. I'd have said I was the crazy one. But now I just believe it wholeheartedly. Yeah, of course, that's the case.
Yeah.
Yeah,
How could you
yeah.
not look into this, what you looked into, and not, you have to have an open mind to begin with. But
Well,
I
this is
mean,
the funny
all these
thing.
people can't be,
Mm,
they can't be BSing. I mean, these things are real
no,
to them.
no. But doctors will dismiss it because they don't understand it. And it
Mm,
took a journalist, me, and my wife, who co-wrote the book with me, who's a private eye. It took
oh,
a private eye and a journalist to investigate something because we were sitting on our heels with COVID that should have been investigated 50 years ago or any time between now and then, and hasn't been because no one's looked for a problem. And we just got alarm bells very early on that, this is all off pat. This is too clear an answer. And we need to talk to people who've been through the experience. And once we started talking to people who've been through the experience, unlike most intensive care doctors, right, we found out things which blew our minds, absolutely blew our minds. And you asked me if it changed my outlook. Yeah, 100%. I know I'm not going to die. And it's quite likely that I've had multiple lives. I don't recall them currently. Um, but people within coma, the consistency of them, saying, "Oh, the lives." There were so many; they were just endless, and just rattling them off. One woman, one South African medical. She works in intensive care. She was in a coma, and she could just rattle off life after life after life, and name the eras. Like this was the Victorian era. This woman had a brooch, a cameo brooch and a collar, and so on and so forth. And in every instance, she was murdered and raped. Every one, and just on and on and on and on and on.
wow.
In some cases, she was in Arizona. Another time, she's in South Africa, in Simonstown, gets caught up in apartheid riots, gets murdered there, and so on and so forth. Just all over the place, not confined to one location, and not confined to any particular time span, just over and over. She also told me that she spent 100,000 years within her coma
Yep.
living on the bottom level of existence and on the top level existence. On the bottom, it was all like silt and sludge, and at the top, it was ones and zeros, and she was flipped between the two. And like,
God.
okay, so doctor, what tablets have you got for that? They just think you are psychotic. Oh, hey doc, I spent 100,000 years. It's no one can take it on board, but to her, that's totally real. And why not? I mean, why not? It's just like Carl Jung, and the collective unconscious that contains the knowledge of all of our existence. So people believe, starting with say Carl Jung, perhaps way back before that. Maybe that's exactly what she was experiencing. Yeah, she was tapping into the collective unconscious, and she was experiencing life through the ages. And why not? Why not? It's perfectly okay to me now.
You know, it would be really freaky if one of these people either drove past a location and went, oh my God, that's where I was in my,
But we
you
get
know,
this a lot in real life, don't we? That
yes, like a
we
deja
we
vu type of
oftentimes hear these
yeah.
things. Yeah, I was in the back of a truck in the army, say, I heard this one, and we went past this point, and I wanted to stop desperately because I knew this village, but I couldn't because I came from Norfolk, and that was the other side of the country, so on and so forth. All this happening a lot. So very likely that is just little glitches, little past lives popping into this life. Uh, deja vu. What the heck's that then? Yeah, false memory, hallucination, delirium. It's something that happens to us all. We don't necessarily understand it. Some people take it seriously, but most of us just dismiss it. Oh, that was weird.
Yeah.
Felt like I was here before.
Yeah, I actually had a experience I've never talked about, but only to people close to me. But when I was in Georgia with my grandparents when I was very little, I think probably under 10, and we went to this Civil War battleground type place, and there was a museum, and I walked into that house, and I knew like where the rooms were and everything, and I was freaking out as a kid.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
didn't even know
Yeah.
what it was. I didn't even know the term deja vu at the time.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
like
And
later on,
you
that's
are
how I was.
not alone. You are not alone in this. You are not. And I think periodically we all get to peer through some window, if only for a nanosecond. But it's
Right.
there. And,
Right.
as I said earlier, people like with dementia. Yeah, I think we may be looking to this next. How can you? Because you don't get them back necessarily. They are going to similar places, I believe, that people are going within their coma, as in they're going back through past lives, or going back, revisiting key elements in ultra detail of this life, reliving their marriage, the birth of their first child, that kind of thing.
I had a very close relative that was close to passing away, and they started talking about their life traveling around the country and all these people coming to see him sing. And he talked about going to this gas station where all these people came into the gas station in the bays, where they work on cars. And he was up on a platform and he was singing to them all. He never even sang. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'll give another example of something akin to that. Nick, who's in the book, in this life couldn't change a light bulb. Yeah, couldn't change a light bulb. In his alternate life, this is the guy that did the Southeast Asian War. He was a brilliant handyman. His dad in that world was a big-time motorcycle mechanic, taught him everything about mechanics and just engineering and so forth. And he could just turn his hand to anything. When he comes out of his coma, his fiance's heating and ventilating system breaks down. He just goes straight up to it, identifies the problem, fixes it like that. He's been fixing his car. He's fixed his neighbor's push lawnmower. He fixed a walk-in fridge freezer that's 6 foot square, and so on. And he says, it's not as if I'm a newfound prodigy and I know immediately how to do these things. I have to go there and figure it out. But I like it. It feels natural to me. So where'd that come from?
How can you explain that? Yeah.
You can't say it's the meds, can you? Oh, we gave you a load of propofol and some ketamine, and now you're a great mechanic. It doesn't go like that.
Wow. And what is another? I'm just part way through your book, but Nick. I think Nick's story really stood out to me. Is he the one that owned the pizza parlor or something?
Yeah, in this world, pizza parlor in this world, and he was mad, crazy in its like wildcat life. In between being in the army and stuff, he just lived all over the country. He had all sorts of different girlfriends. He ran some kind of frozen food business, and he was selling it on cruise ships. And he spent a lot of time on cruise ships. And he said it was great on deck, drinking margaritas and daiquiris. I had a great time, and this is real. Other people told me, one guy told me, for example, in this life, he's really big in sailing. And in his coma life, he was in something like the West Indies, and he was sailing a lot while he was there. And really just having a great life and talking to people and doing things. People are having real events that we cannot always explain. Some things we can find parallels for, as in, this is like a near-death experience. This is like taking ayahuasca in the Amazon. Alternate lives, Buddhists will say that they can see their past lives, but I don't believe, the ones in deepest transcendental meditation, but I don't believe that they're actually living it minute by minute, as in, stubbing your toe, it hurts, that kind of detail, because that is the detail that people will report within their comas.
Now, what about had anyone spoken a different language, like in their coma?
Yeah. Okay. So if you hunt on the internet, you will find things like people saying, my cousin was in a coma and he woke up and now he speaks French and doesn't understand English. Well, okay, married to a private investigator, I'm an investigative journalist, track them down. No, they don't exist. We try everything to track them down. They don't exist. There are some odd, spurious stories, people going into the future, for example, but we couldn't find any ourselves. And we couldn't actually pin down anyone who said they had a new language. But the new skill, I think, is pretty good. when they come back, they are, in many senses, the person they were before, but they feel that they're having to act the role because they don't quite remember their life before, and their life in coma sometimes was just that much more real, that much more real. But Nick he said, sometimes I feel that I had far more there than I do here, certainly in terms of his love life and the fun he had, just like partying and just being a wild animal. He had a great time, and he very likely had a heart attack when he was like middle-aged because of the lifestyle, crazy lifestyle he was living, and then woke up in a hospital here. And okay, someone's asking a question. What do you think it would take for the scientific community to study this seriously? Oh, you know what I really like? I really like it when doctors experiment on themselves. You know, they inject themselves with a little bit of cholera to see what happens and so on. I think some doctors should put their hands up and go deep into coma and come back and tell us what they experienced. I mentioned her name is Jan. In South Africa, works in intensive care. They placed her into medically induced coma. When she came out of the coma, she went back to see her colleagues, the anaesthetists and the ICU doctors, to tell them what she experienced. And they were like, oh, yeah? Oh, really? And just like thinking she's completely bonkers. And they will not take it seriously. That, by the way, is ICU delirium. Oh, you had an hallucination. Oh, that's just a false memory. Yeah. No.
Wow. So I'm experiencing some internet issues. I don't see it on your end. I think it's on my end. I have no idea why. Everything's usually really good here.
Clear as a bell.
But
yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good. So do you think this is it? You say you may look into a docuseries or something like that.
Yeah, what we want to do, we need to expand this. We need to reach as many people as possible. And I really, really, really want to wake up the medical world. It's not like, I've written this book, this is one I'm going to write about trains or something. No, it's not going to be like that. This will be the thing we concentrate on. We have to wake up the medical world, and we want coma survivors to understand they are not alone, and to understand in many ways that what they've experiencing post-coma is a consequence of the coma, not for the original reasons they were placed in the hospital. You go in with pneumonia, you don't necessarily lose your balance or tens of points off your IQ. It's the hospital treatment that's doing that. And it's known. It's just a fact. It's called post-intensive care syndrome. It's known about. And yet you can ask a whole bunch of people that work in various intensive care units around the world about post-intensive care syndrome, and they go, what? They don't know about it. They don't know about it. Or they change the subject, and they just won't talk about it. I tried to interest medical journalists in this as a story, and they were like, the ones that bothered to reply, like, are you crazy, pal? Are you crazy, pal? Right? This has been standard medical procedure for the past 50 years. Get real. And I want to say things like, if you went back 170 years, you wouldn't find a doctor who would wash his hands, because they consider it insulting if you suggested they did so.
Yeah.
They used to bleed people at the point of death, right? For 2,000 plus years, probably still do somewhere, right? They've killed countless people that way. So you can't say, oh, we've been doing this in the past. Medical history is littered with examples of having got it wrong. One famous director of Harvard Medical School told his students once, apparently, half of what you learn today will be proven in 10 years to be wrong. The trouble is, your tutors don't know which half. So doctors and nurses should really be alert to this, but they're not. They start practicing experience-based medicine. The boss says, do it, do it. My colleagues have always been doing it, do it. Oh, but I heard this podcast that says you really shouldn't do it. And they go, wake up, are you crazy? These poor people, you would like to be there on a vent, breathing and all the rest of it. The kindest thing is to knock them out. That's what they believe, but they're wrong. They're totally wrong.
Well, I'll tell you, I was on a vent coming out of heart surgery, ventilator, and it was absolutely brutal. I was trying to reach to grab it out, and they had my hand strapped down.
Yeah, they will strap people down because they will pull the tubes.
I can understand why.
Discomfort.
Yeah.
But you can be conscious with the tube down your throat, no problem, if it's done correctly. You tell people up front what you're going to do. You get their approval to do it. When they come, you just knock them out for a few minutes, put the tube down. As they come out, yeah, really horrible. But you'll have a loved one beside them, calming them down. And in the same way that you and I have not thought about breathing in the times we've been talking together, that patient will soon forget to think about his or her breathing, and it will happen automatically. And modern ventilators allow the patient to initiate the breathing, these microprocessor controlled vents. So it's actually quite possible. And then they're there and they can run a business on their laptop. They can, text their friends and family or their nurses on their phone. They can do all sorts. And the idea is to get them walking around so that the joints don't calcify, the nerves don't separate, all the rest of it. That way, people walk out of intensive care units as opposed to being wheeled out on a gurney and taken to another care facility further down the line. And people will say, oh, but it's so expensive to keep them all conscious. It's much easier to deal with them when they're all like sacks of potatoes in a bed. But that's not true. It's just not true, because so much more money is expended within the hospital system on aftercare that if you got them out of the intensive care unit a lot earlier, there wouldn't have to be an aftercare. A vast number of people that have survived coma do not return to their normal occupation. If they do, they don't hold their job down because they don't have any confidence in themselves anymore. I mentioned the woman with mathematical whiz. People are like that. Deborah, who spent the time in a serial killer themed bar, she worked in account management. Afterwards, she was a complete mess. She didn't understand what she was doing. She'd been doing this job for 6 years prior to being in a coma. She gets back to office. She doesn't even know what drawer things are in. So
Wow, that's
this is
terrible.
the mess
That's
that
a
people are left
nightmare
in.
right there.
And they're losing their jobs and marriages break up. There's another financial penalty in that happening. So you can save a vast amount of money by actually keeping the patient conscious. And it's not just me saying this, all the up-to-date medical literature points to it. And if you don't believe me, at the back of the book, we point to all the medical lit that actually proves everything that we're saying. And you won't find anywhere to make competition of this. You will not find a medical textbook advocating prolonged deep sedation. None. We've looked.
Now you said inducing a coma, chemically inducing a coma through drugs or whatever, is only in good and rare occasions. What type of an occasion would that be?
Okay, again, there's a brief period of time. People are suffering a brain seizure because the belief being that we need to switch it off before it causes damage to itself. But again, not for a lengthy period of time, certainly not for months. People who've had certain complications following open heart surgery, and the brain uses up a vast amount of oxygen and they want to divert that oxygen into the heart. But again, maybe a longer period, but not for months at a time. And people with certain injuries, such as abdominal, where they really need to keep it exceptionally still, they would do that. But again, not necessarily for months at a time. And if they do, they should have what's called sedation vacations, where they keep bringing them around, trying to orientate them and then put them back into a comfort zone, but not into the depths of hell where you're watching your wife die repeatedly in childbirth. Not to those levels.
There's someone in the chat that's written quite a bit of their own experience here, and I just thought we'd just put it up there so you could look at it. He spent a lot of time as a teen and a young adult in a deep sleep due to a medical condition. I'm not sure from whatever to 75.
I can't answer that. I mean, it's a terrible thing to plug yourself in.
And
but sleep is not affecting.
He says in this he had another life, I guess here, according to him, that he had 2 houses, a job.
Yeah, okay, that's again in the ballpark. That is in the ballpark. And maybe again, that is more like a near-death experience. Odd things happen to people in sleep. They can't explain sleep either, for that matter. So there are people that claim to go all manner of places. I go to the same place regularly.
That is just as unbelievable as these other stories that they go back. Or, I mean, I've had a situation where I've gone back to a dream before. I wake up and I go back to the same dream. But I mean, when people are having this horrible nightmare and they wake up and they go back to it, oh my God, I just can't even imagine.
Oftentimes in loops or stuck in one reality, as I said, like 80 years in a serial killer themed bar, and able to measure the trunk, the passing of time by various events. And eventually the place wasn't financially viable and they had to close it. And what did they do with her? They put her in a wheelchair, took her to an organ harvesting facility where she was put in a tank and watched her own body dissolve around her.
Oh,
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
yeah. I mean,
you know,
that is just absolutely horrible. I mean, I read a couple of the nightmare ones, but it's also, like you said, if there's a heaven, there's a hell. These people are having
and
either
points between.
beautiful experiences or,
Mm.
or everyday experiences or just horrible experiences. And yeah, I wouldn't
The
want to.
variety, the sheer variety is
I
mind-boggling.
wouldn't want to roll the dice and
I
go.
wouldn't let them place me or any loved one in a coma. I'm
Yeah,
kind of old now, so I won't bother. If I were younger, I would have no coma tattooed on my chest because I just wouldn't have that happen.
yeah,
And I would have it done to all my children, no coma tattooed on their chest. But if
yeah,
you went to a hospital and said, "Oh, please, doctor, don't put my loved one into a coma because I believe it's dangerous," they will laugh at you and very likely get security. So you're not really
right.
going to get away with that. You're just not. You should just
Now,
hope that you find
yeah.
yourself in a hospital where they're now looking at the modern medical literature.
Now, are any we're just about at the end here, but are any comas like let's say I think you did mention where a girl was on a motorcycle or something and she got knocked in the head basically. And I know some of that happened too. I'm actually going to ask them if they experienced anything.
Oh,
This
please
guy I
do.
know that was in
Always
a
do.
coma.
Always do. And sympathetically ask them, it's like, hey, tell us about your weird coma dream. Because people are like, so reluctant to talk about it. But if approached correctly, people will tell you. It's a bit like near-death experiences. It was pointed out to me that if you actually ask around you, you'll be surprised that friends and family have had near-death experiences.
Hmm.
Straight off, I asked two of my friends, admittedly both of whom were war correspondents, if they'd had near-death experiences, and they both had, one in combat and another through illness. So yeah, um, these things are happening. They're all happening to us, but we're not understanding them or taking them seriously. Now, just quickly, as we're moving into another age where artificial intelligence is the thing, other people are trying to explore the mind, particularly consciousness, not doctors anymore necessarily. Um, Computer engineers and others. Therein lies a possibility for understanding consciousness. And the first thing I would do if I was tasked with understanding consciousness, I would debrief coma survivors and get them to tell me where they've been.
Hmm. Wow. Fantastic. Wow. Now, before you leave, when we first started talking before we went live, I believe you said you had a UFO experience.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
And
Okay.
you kind of think there
I
may be a couple of parallels too or something, like,
Oh, I think
to
everything's tied only in that there's so little that we do understand that I imagine everything else is all connected. One thing that people will tell you from within a coma, within psychedelics, is that everything is connected.
Hmm.
Everything that opposites, which like the two poles of a magnet, are in fact together. Everything is combined and together. Now, I've forgotten. Did you ask me a question? I've gone off on a little rant
Yeah.
there. What was
Oh,
your
yeah.
question?
Your UFO experience.
Yeah, right, UFO. So I was on the Pakistan side of the Afghan border, a passenger in a car on a busy road. And I've got another journalist sitting beside me. And I'm looking out the window, and there's a hill. And above the hill is what I think is an aircraft at an angle of taking off. And I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at it, and it's not moving. And I'm trying to figure out, so if the car's moving, is there any way that you can this would appear to be staying still? And I'm thinking about this, and my partner just nudges me and says, "Are you looking at what I'm looking at?" And really, we're both looking at the same thing. It was like the fuselage of an aircraft, silverish, no tail, no wings, no markings, no cockpit glass, anything. And it just stayed there. And no joke, for around about 10 minutes, we just looked at this thing. We couldn't have got the driver to stop because on a mad road and you're it's called the road of death that we were on. You just don't
Oh
want to
God.
risk that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
we were just looking at this for forever, and it just stayed there, did not move, and it was about 500 feet up, something like that. But it's hard to say given I don't know its size. The other thing is, somebody pointed out to me later whilst relaying the story, it looked like an aircraft fuselage, but if you take a disc like a flying saucer and put it flat on
Put on its
towards you,
side.
it would look
Yeah.
like a fuselage.
Right.
And so that could have been what we were seeing. But we saw something that you would not expect to see. There was no explanation. Oh, it was a weather balloon. Nothing like that. Also, there's hardly any tech on the Afghan, Pakistan border, stuff like that gets shot down within minutes. So,
Yeah.
what the heck was that? Yeah, that first saw that.
Yeah. And then, I had someone involved in like the antiques world that I'm in, and they told me that they're not into UFOs or anything like that, just nothing like that. But they had like an experience with, I think it was maybe mushrooms or something like that.
Oh, well,
And
that would
they
do
were
it. Yeah.
absolutely convinced that they met an alien. Absolutely convinced. And
Yeah, I
is
mean,
that
entities. I
an
mean,
entity? Yeah.
mushrooms, not so much, but maybe so, depending on quantity. If you took peyote, for sure, you'll meet
Or
entities.
DMT. DMT is what she had.
DMT, you will certainly meet entities. There's supposed to be something like 144 different types of entities that you might meet. But
Whoa. Yeah.
a bit like people's experiences if they're abducted, the word is ineffable. We just cannot, we don't have the words to explain what we saw. Sometimes people say there was no visuals, but I was there, completely there, experiencing everything around me, but no visuals. Um, Other times they are seeing entities and things moving across their line of vision, or they will look at a particular entity because it's extra weird, and then that entity will interact with them. But you can't describe that entity or draw it as on a photo kit or something. At the police station, there's no way that you can conjure up how that appeared. It's like you just can't. Can't.
Wow. This is so fascinating. Well, I really
But we
wish
go
you
into all of this.
yeah, right. I really wish you luck, and I actually know a couple of filmmakers I'm actually going to throw something at, unless you have
Oh, please do.
someone already in mind, because I think this
We've got
is
to get the word
got to
out.
be
And
explored.
also,
Yeah.
thank you so much. I'm sorry I'm talking over. It's so rude of me. I'm just
No,
so
no.
excited.
Yeah.
If you're listening and you know someone who's been in a coma, gently ask them about it. And if you've been in a coma, um, you know the book. And it's also an audio book. Here's the other thing. Coma survivors are not really into reading when they come out because they don't seem to have the attention span. So we produced an audio book. I'm actually finding that more and more people today, post COVID, are reading less. I'm actually struggling with reading now, but I'm okay with audiobooks. I mean, I read books that you wouldn't credit. And I haven't been able to read one since I finished this. Other people are experiencing this. So there's a great audiobook, stunning audiobook, which really brings it to life.
Now, do you
Plug,
narrate
plug,
the book?
plug.
Are you the one?
No.
Yeah.
We got a wonderful South African actress called Danny Painter. Now, South African accent is not generally well known. It is like sunshine. It's like liquid honey. It is so
Yes.
exceptionally beautiful, and her diction is crystal clear. And when she takes you down to the depths of these stories, or to the peaks of heaven, I mean, to have her take you is fantastic. You're really there. So yes,
Excellent.
plug the audiobook.
Excellent. Well, someone, I just want to thank someone here. Hold on. Uh, Thank you so much, Bo, very much. That's very nice of you for that donation. And so I'm hoping people will buy your book. I am loving this book. I'm going to finish it cover to cover because it's just absolutely fascinating. And I wish you all the luck. And I'm telling you what I'm going to do after we get done tonight. I'm going to write my friend who was actually in a coma,
Oh,
and I'll let you
yeah,
know if they had.
yeah, do,
And it was
do.
actually another motorcycle. He was on a scooter in the Bahamas, and he fell off the scooter without a helmet, and it was hit or miss for that he would even survive. And
There's
when he was
so many ways.
he was 4 years old, he went into a pool when no one knew he was outside, and the pool was covered, and he was down in the pool for 40 minutes, and it
Under
was
the
cold
water.
under the water, and it was really cold water, and he was revived, and
Lucky.
he survived, and he didn't
Yeah.
have. I mean, he was so lucky that
Yeah.
the ice had just thawed off the top of it, and it was that cold.
Wow.
So
That's the sort of situation that people many a time report a very clear near-death experience, as in like crossing over, getting to the pearly gates, that level.
yeah.
Very
Who
often.
knows? He might be my next guest.
Sounds interesting. Explore this world. We should all explore this world. It's beyond fascinating.
That's right.
It's mind-blowing.
And we know so little,
Martin,
as I say. We know so
we know
little.
remarkably little.
Yeah.
Martin, thank you so much for helping bring understanding to something that is not understood.
Yeah, that's right. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Take care.
All right. Good night. And I know it's real late for you, so thank you. All right. We'll be back next time. Thank you all.